Slurpty diddly do, my G's. I hope you're all doing wonderful. I hope you've all had a good weekend. Very productive. Lots of rest. All that kind of good stuff. Today, just to kick off the week, I've got a really small tip which will help a lot of newbies out, and I'm going to debunk a bit of a production myth which I struggled with for a long time. I've been producing for many years, maybe like 13 years or so, and I remember I was plagued by this piece of information for a few years until I realised it was just nonsense. And but before we do that, I'd like to formally invite you all to my bass barbecue, the Duel of the Stakes. If you imagine the Duel of the Fates song from the Star Wars soundtrack playing in the background now, I won't put it on YouTube because I'll get a copyright strike. But that's a great song, isn't it? But yeah, we're going to have our next feedback live stream. So it's for music producers, mostly drum and bass, but not limited to. And because there would be too many submissions if I let everyone join in, this is behind a paywall. So it is for people who are in my Discord community. But however, if you're not in there, then I still formally invite you to come and watch our live stream, because I think these are one of the best things that I have on the YouTube channel is the feedback live streams. I've been doing them for a while, and they are a lot of fun because we get to see what people have been up to, and it's a friendly competition. So we're not really we're trying to build a positive community where we can give some constructive advice to each other, but really, you know, we're not actually in competition. It's just a community building activity. But anyway, that's going to be on the 25th of October. Probably be around the afternoon. I'll post the exact time nearer the date. But yes, in case anyone does want to get involved, you will have to submit your tracks via my Discord. Anyway, let us continue today with my tip. And this is just a tip that was just inspired by a student I had recently. Who's a little bit more of a beginner, but this is something that, yeah, I've fallen into this trap before, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on it. And it's basically this concept that you should low cut, you know, sounds below sort of 20 hertz because the human ear can't hear it, and same thing for the high end. You should high cut sounds, you know, over, I don't know, 17 or 20,000 hertz because the human ear can't hear it. So you should get rid of that. And the problem with that is, guys, is although it's true, so this real, if we focus on the low cutting aspect, because this is really the most important one, you know, the high cutting's not as important, but the low cutting kind of concept, really this only would apply to sounds where you've got those frequencies in. And realistically, that's only usually ever going to be in your kick drum or your bass, particularly your bass which contains a sub bass, you know. So if you're talking about those two things, you know, then this problem applies, okay? Or problem applies. So if I've got a bass, let's say I've got a bunch of basses, I've grouped them up, there's my sub is in there, and so my bass group, I've got all the low end in there, and I've got all this, you know, there's a lot of this content here around 20 to 30, pardon me, around 20 to 30 hertz, you know. And yeah, so you might say, you know, we should this was the advice that I once learned on the internet and used to follow for a few years until I realized it was nonsense. And that advice was, you know, the human ear can't hear things below 20 hertz or so we need to cut that out. And so while there is an element of truth to this concept that the human ear can't hear sounds below 20 hertz or wherever it may be, depending on how old and deaf you are, while there's an element of truth to that, that doesn't, what the problem is that if you, just because that fact is true, that doesn't mean that an EQ is going to solve that problem. And the reason for that is, guys, is because when you're EQing, you're recreating a new sonic image every time you change things with an EQ. So it's not actually, just because you EQ something and take it out doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, you know? So if you actually think about it, especially when the low end is so sensitive, and especially when it's pretty much just a sine wave in the low end, which is the fundamental, you know, the fundamental of sound, the fundament of sound. You know, it's the creation of sound, essentially a sine wave. Um, what you actually do, guys, is if you try to do this, is you will actually destroy your low end like a lot. So when it comes to the bass and the kick, I will never do this kind of cut. I'll always leave that low end in. Yes, the human ear can't technically hear below 20 hertz or something, but the nature of doing this kind of EQ cut causes more harm than good. That's what I've found through my journey in producing, because I did this for years. I would cut this out because I heard that I could get more space in my mix down. But when I realised I was not ever getting the results I wanted for the low end bass power, and I stopped doing it, I basically ended up leaving all of that low end in still, and my whole bass just is so much more louder and powerful, And I've just tried this technique for, I've been doing it for years and years now, and never doing that. And I always feel like my bass is like 10 times more powerful, So that while the kind of fact is true that the human ear can't hear that below that amount, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should cut there, because you will most likely do more harm to the sound than good, because you'll actually reduce the power and the quality of the low end in general. So it's not really ever worth doing that, in my opinion. Now, obviously, we have to low cut many other sounds, any other sound in your mix, leads, snares, vocals, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, then you want to low cut, things like that. But when you're talking about sounds that contain your pure bass power, like your kick drum and your bass or your sub bass, I always avoid doing that low cutting EQ cut, because I've never been able to get the power I want if I do that, because I'm sort of disrupting the nature of the low end, the natural sine wave. I'm disrupting what's going on down there, and it's better to leave those frequencies in, to be honest. Provided you've got a clear sound, you've got a clear sine wave, and you haven't got a bunch of random frequency rumble content in your kick or in your bass. Providing your sounds that you're using are clean, you should be absolutely fine in leaving all of that in, and then you won't have this problem where the EQ cut will cause a knock-on effect and degrade the whole sound quality and power of the low end. So I never do that anymore. I just choose sounds that have a great low end, a clean low end to begin with, and then you don't have to do that. That's my advice. It's helped me a lot. And the same thing applies in the high end. I'll see sometimes people do that as well, because again, perhaps the human ear can't hear all the way up there. But what you just have to remember is that it's always a knock-on effect. That's the whole key takeaway from this video, is that, just because you think you can EQ something out and it's gone, that's not the case. An EQ is not perfect, and everything that you do with an EQ has a knock-on effect. So if I thought my bass had too much high end, which in this case it doesn't really, but if I thought there was too much content up here and I did that, yeah, it would take those parts out that the human ear can't hear, but it would actually have a knock-on effect across all of these other frequencies, because yeah, it's a common misconception to think that I EQ this and then therefore it's gone and it's perfect. It's not the case. Everything you do has a knock-on effect. So if you drastically take out all of this content, 16K and upwards, that's a big amount of change to the sound. And when the EQ recreates the sonic image again, that will have a knock-on effect on everything else, So things that are so drastic like that, and also so drastic like this, they will have a dramatic effect on the whole sound quality. So it's always best to do subtle EQing and leave the low end as pure and powerful as you can, choosing great sounds and letting the sine wave do its job is a great piece of advice for the low end. And for the high end, if you've really got too much, too many spiky high frequencies or something, it's best to target where those actually are and bring them down with a nice bell EQ rather than to go completely mental and do such a drastic high cut that will then have a knock-on effect on the quality of everything else. And you could also do a little bit of it would be better to do a bit of shelving, you know, shelve things down a bit in the high end if you were worried that there was way too much, you know, air up there. It would be better to shelve things down a bit like this, and that will have a much less of a dramatic effect on the sound quality. But you can have these frequencies in the high end here that the human ear can't really hear. You can leave them in and it's no problem, as long as, yeah, it's not like mentally high, in which case you can shelf it down. You know, having those frequencies up there is not going to cause you any problems in your mix down from what I've found. So you can leave, you know, in those frequencies where the human ear can't necessarily hear them really high up or really low down. It doesn't mean that you have to remove them, because they often, if you remove them incorrectly or too dramatically, it will have a negative effect on the whole sound quality. So just because the human ear can't hear it doesn't mean that you have to always take it out. Yeah, just be mindful of, you know, using high quality sounds in the low end so that you don't have to do that anyway. And just be mindful of your overall frequency balances in the high end, and any kind of spikes or things, just take them, you know, tone them down with a nice subtle bell cut or high shelf cut, rather than dramatic, that kind of dramatic over compensation. All right, so that's my little tip for today. Let us know down in the comments if that helped you guys. If you have any more mix down questions, I'll happily answer them in upcoming videos for the rest of this week. Much love, my G's. More from me very soon. Take care.